Okay.
Then it might say, "Are you happy to do that?" If
Yeah,
it
no,
might.
it's asking to the
Brilliant.
meeting. I'm
Thank you.
staying.
So, okay, the title is "How does the interplay between social and mainstream media impact upon global public health communication during a pandemic?" And this is an MD that I started during the first lockdown in the UK from March 2020 and has been continued contemporaneously. I'm doing documentary analysis of the first 200 World Health Organization situation reports that they publish daily. I've also got 1,400 newspaper front pages to look at. And I'm asking Phil Hammond if he will give me the 50,000 words that he's written for Private Eye.
Brilliant.
And there was one other thing that I was going to do as well, which was documentary analysis, which, oh yeah, I bought all the papers as well between like March and June, like the actual physical copies of the papers. Because the trouble is things change online and they disappear.
Yes.
Which I find quite disconcerting, almost Orwellian, I would suggest. So there's basically 4 parts to this. The first group of questions around recollections, and then origins, subsequent behaviours, and then at the end there's a little kind of faces and phrases of the pandemic. Okay. And then what I'd ask is, can you, what's the highest degree that you have? Because I'm going to collate it into like an anonymised table.
I don't have a degree. I have an HND. So the highest academic level I did was an HND at Cheltenham and Gloucester University.
Okay, but the thing is, you've been like, you have a higher knowledge and awareness of stuff because of the work that you've done, right?
Sure. Yes. So 15 years experience as chief executive of a national cancer charity, which involved political affairs, public affairs, drug reimbursement. I was on the steering committee for various cancer trials and was a member of the National Cancer Research Institute. So I think experientially, I'd give myself a degree.
You might get an honorary one, you never know. Definitely. Okay, so I completely agree with that. So that's good. Because the other reason, what I'm trying to do is, obviously everything will be anonymized, but it will be like, I don't know, a 64, my mum, you're a 64-year-old woman with no degree who works in the health and social care sector says this kind of stuff.
Yes.
So I'm trying to contextualize, because otherwise it could just be me asking my mates. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I get a very broad range of opinion, including people that are anti-vaxxers, including people that, if I could get somebody from the Facebook group QA Anon or QAnon, I'd love to have a chat with them. But we'll see.
Some of my relatives that kind of fall into that category.
Sorry?
I could give you some relatives.
Okay, yeah, cool. Well, I'm all up for that. But okay, so that's the overall thing. And then the bit that I read out. Sorry.
If you wanted to encapsulate that, Chris, I was just thinking you could say, 52-year-old health professional working in senior management.
Okay, senior management,
fine. Not senior NHS management, but senior health management.
I think I'll do the CEO of the National Cancer Charity, involved in political affairs, drug reimbursement, and National Cancer Research Institute. So I'll copy that into the table just to let people know.
Okay.
And then, so the first bit is 2020 has been a year like no other. The purpose of this semi-structured interview is to explore your views on the various forms of media has had on you personally and how you've processed and reacted to evolving news of the pandemic.
Yep.
So the first bit is, what are your recollections of when you first heard about COVID-19?
BBC News item that was the early, it was just a sort of piqued interest in the issue that there was a new virus spreading in China.
Okay. And what kind of time was that, would you say? Like January, February, March?
Late January.
Late January.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what other sources of media do you use to get your news?
Well, local New Zealand television news, daily news bulletins from various channels, Twitter, Facebook, BBC, but my main news source is Channel 4 News.
Okay, Twitter, Facebook, BBC, but main is Channel 4. Brilliant.
Or the one I set the most store by, the program, the news program. Oh, talk to you. Sorry, hang on. The news program that I seek out news from. Yeah. And want to tune into, and it's part of my daily habit actually, is get up, make myself a coffee, come downstairs, turn on the VPN, and then get into Channel 4 and watch the news. And I start my day with Channel 4 News. Okay,
brilliant. So you said the first country you heard was affected was China. How did that make you feel? And were you in New Zealand? You were in New Zealand at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in New Zealand at the time, and I felt that was entirely predictable, not judgmentally predictable, but that is the history of the last few novel viruses has come from China, and so it didn't surprise me.
Okay, and did you change any behaviours on hearing the news? And if so, what did you change?
Not initially, because at that point it hadn't got out of China, and I think it was when there was news that one of the doctors in Wuhan had contracted the disease and died, and then there was initial denials, and then there was some funny business going on in China. I think I started to pay more attention at that point. Yeah. And by that I would seek out news. I would actually, rather than passively receive news, I would actually look for information about it. And the main reason for that was that we were planning several trips. We were due to be guests at the Melbourne Grand Prix in March, and we had tickets and flights to go to that. It was my daughter's 21st birthday in May, and we were due to fly back to the UK. So I wanted to keep an eye on it for practical purposes. Not necessarily health concerns, personal health concerns, but more to keep an eye on commitments that we had coming up.
Okay. And how did your views vary as compared with, say, your friends and family? You mentioned about you could put me in touch with some people that didn't believe in it, but how would you say you're in the minority of your friends and family in terms of your viewpoint to this, or how does it compare?
About the initial incident of, how alarmed I was by it, or concerned I was.
So the initial incident, but then also subsequent behaviours since.
So I would categorise myself as being quite risk averse, and I was more concerned about coronavirus for people at risk in my family, my parents. The fact that they didn't seem to be taking it very seriously. And I think I would categorise that as a little bit of exceptionality. So my mum is a devout Catholic, and stopping her from going to Mass was a challenge. And I don't know whether she thought that Catholics would somehow be exempt. I'm not sure what was going on there, but there's almost a kind of, if you do worthy things, you're going to be okay. It was only certain categories of people that were going to be at risk, and there was a lot of ageism. It felt a lot like Brexit, actually, to begin with, and a lot of tribalism, people in groups considering themselves to be more or less at risk and adapting their behaviour accordingly. I think that a lot of the social media feeds that I see are from people in the medical community, and that being patient groups or professional groups. And so I saw a lot more concern coming from my social media feed, and anxiety coming from people in my social media feeds, my Facebook groups, my Twitter, people that I follow on Twitter, were more concerned than family and friends and what I was seeing in the media. A lot of the stuff that I was seeing in mainstream media, particularly BBC, felt to be a little bit dismissive for my tastes, a little bit, I want to say pejorative, but I don't mean pejorative. I mean, again, this sort of boosterous sort of exceptionality, kind of like, oh, we're all right. Particularly around Cheltenham races and around the football match that occurred. And I at that point, I was really alarmed that the government weren't acting to restrict transmission to a greater extent than I would have wished. And I was talking to family and friends about adapting their behaviour before the government did. And so, as I said, I would classify myself as being fairly risk averse about the whole business.
So I was exactly the same in terms of advising friends and family to do stuff before the government did. And that's not because I'm risk averse. So I wouldn't put it down to you being that. It's because I had an understanding of what was happening. And I also had the benefit of social media so that I could see what's happening in other countries. Yeah. And I think that's certainly one thing that politicians are struggling with in terms of Jacinda Ardern out there. She does a speech and suddenly it's watched over here immediately.
You know, the big thing about Jacinda Ardern is that her degree was in communications, and she doesn't talk down to people. She talks about the team of 5 million. She talks about, she was the person I think that came up with the term bubbles, you know, and she talks in a very understandable way, not a condescending way. And I know Boris Johnson likes to, you know, almost like sort of, you know, bustle his chest feathers and dropping in a bit of Latin and a bit of, you know, historical, you know, Greek or whatever to self-aggrandize. But that doesn't translate and it's not trustworthy. And Jacinda Ardern is very good at, for example, if you, I would encourage you, as if you've not got enough to do, to look at some of her press conferences during the peak of the pandemic.
I've watched them. I was watching them because of this.
She gets a really disorganised press corps that shout out at her. None of this pre-selected questions. It's kind of like from the floor, everybody starts shouting out questions. And one of the things that really struck me about her is that she's not afraid of not knowing all the answers. If somebody asks a question and she doesn't know the answer, she says, I don't know, but I will find out. And when you watch the next day's press conference, she says, oh, somebody asked me yesterday about such and such. I asked the team and the answer is this.
Yeah.
So she's got integrity, she's got humility, she's got integrity. And those two things are sadly missing from the UK.
That's very interesting. And I think, yeah, okay. Thank you for that. Nobody's mentioned that yet, so that's very good. But that's why I want to do a global MD, because this is a case of my background, whether it be in pharmaceutical medicine, clinical medicine, media, education for the whole York medical students. I've got so many touch points throughout my week with various different people. I feel I'm in a unique position to pull all this together.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to bias the other questions that are coming up. Well, no, the next question is, so hold on. This has been widely described as by the media as a once in a century event. In your view, could an outbreak such as this happen again in our lifetimes?
There are several ways of answering that. A once in a century event can happen one year and it can happen the next year because the clock starts again.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
So we could have another pandemic virus next year. We could have another pandemic virus in 100 years or 200 years.
Yeah.
They're iterations in evolvement, and until we understand that process, I don't have a view.
Okay.
I remember bird flu. I remember MERS, just as a matter of sort of interest. Nobody, they could have turned into big pandemics. I mean, I suppose I was first concerned about pandemics with Ebola, because that's such a scary disease. And I was concerned then when the last lot of Ebola really kicked off, and I'm just thinking, please God, they can shut it down. But who knows why that started, and it happened again a few months later. This could happen again.
So
I don't
completely agree with Ebola, 100%. And I'm reading Spillover at the moment, which is a very interesting book by David Quayman, which I recommend, as well as Contagion. And there was another one, which was A Pandemic Century. But the reason I ask about that is because in some of these interviews that I've done so far, lots of people seem to think that they didn't, even science reporters didn't take this seriously, because as you said, there's been swine flu, MERS, SARS, mad cow disease, various stuff, whatever. And it's been built up to be something, and then it hasn't. And there's almost been an anticlimactic moment to it. Whereas a lot of people were looking at this, and I'll be honest, my knowledge of those previous pandemics has only increased because I've started reading and learning about it now. So I've been looking at it retrospectively. But what I could do in the early days of this, and like my Amazon order, when I ordered loads of medical supplies, pulse oximeters, all this sort of stuff, was I didn't know that there'd be happy hypoxia, but I knew that if health services are going to be overwhelmed, like they are in Italy, which interestingly in the press, they're saying that, Lombardy's some back-end hospital. It's not. It's one of the best in the world in terms of funding per capita, right? So I knew that if our health service, which was rated as 8th or something in the world, was overwhelmed, then there has to come to a point where the demand on that system is going to be so much, people at home are going to have to say, oh yeah, my SATs are 70%, and therefore the ambulance would be prioritised.
So you've hit the nail on the head with regard to one of the reasons I believe New Zealand has been successful, is because the Italian hospitals that were overwhelmed are really well funded, well staffed, and they've got great ventilator ICU bed per head of population, better than the UK. New Zealand has got a quarter of the ITU facility for the UK. So one of the reasons, it's my belief, it's never been said, but I truly believe that one of the reasons that Jacinda Ardern acted the way she did when she said that she wasn't prepared for the herd, she was inferring the UK, people have spoken about herd immunity, but that would mean hundreds and thousands of deaths, and I'm not prepared for that to happen in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is that there isn't the capacity here. It would have been swamped.
Sure, but equally interestingly, also, whether it's capacity or not, like subsequently, if you look at the disease course of COVID-19, going on a ventilator is the worst possible thing that you can happen to you, because the chances of getting off it might be 40%, and that's even if you're young, fit and healthy, right? So ventilation is not the good thing. We didn't know that then. But also, the other thing that we did know then is the World Health Organization was saying that it is morally and ethically repugnant to let a novel pathogen spread and move through a community when we don't know what it's going to do. And that happened on the same day that Boris and co was talking about herd immunity.
Yes. So one of the really good things about the New Zealand approach, I mentioned to you about Ashley Bloomfield and his background in public health, but he's really good. He's kind of got a bit of a pattern now in the way that he reports the numbers that is naturally evolved because of the way that they're managing the borders and stuff here. But what he also does is that when there's somebody come across the border, because the borders are still open to Kiwis to come home, but they have to come home to managed isolation, which is not go on public transport and go home and behave yourself. It is, you get off the bus, you pick up your bags, you get off the plane, you pick up your bags, you're put on a bus, you're taken to a hotel that is guarded by the army. And you have a test on day 3 and a test on day 12. And if both of those come back clear, then you're allowed to leave on day 14, right? Proper managed isolation. But there are cases that occur in managed isolation, of course. And what he always says, and I always think it's quite a good little touchstone, is he says, and we have reported those numbers to the WHO. So he always references that there is a senior organisation that is overseeing the response. And I think that that's, again, been really helpful in the way that New Zealanders perceive the way that their government has acted.
Thank you, that's really interesting.
As a part of a New Zealand effort, but also a global effort, and they do see themselves as global team players.
That's really interesting. And you know what, I was hoping that all this global Britain and all this stuff that they were talking about, Brexit, this was the opportunity to step up on the global stage. And because in the past, people would come to the UK and talk to us about how to handle Ebola and other pandemics. But the trouble is you've got, so I spoke to somebody about this who, because it has to say anonymous, it wasn't as part of the interviews, but I bet you could guess who said it, because you know me, you could work it out. But this guy said he stopped listening to Boris the minute that he said, I'm going around shaking everybody's hands, and then look what happened, he ended up in ITU. And it is just...
That's what I mean about the boosterism.
It's unbelievable in that regard. But then now we've just seen stuff coming out, literally just now, I was at night reading through the news, seeing that they want to mix and match 2 vaccines.
Yeah.
And also the stuff that's come out from the MHRA, quite frankly, I mean, this puts my job in a difficult position from an AstraZeneca point of view, but speaking as a personal citizen, looking at what comes out on MHRA LinkedIn feeds, it is dumbed down to the nth degree. MHRA, tick, signed off, safe, good to go. And that is dodgy, because once that trust has gone, that you undermine that thing completely. However, again, they've seen with Public Health England, they're scrapping it and talking about turning it into a National Health Institute, Protection Institute, or whatever. And that also
managed by Harding.
Yes, of course. But that also means moving stuff from Porton Down, which are biologically hazardous materials, to having it host on an urban industrialised area in Essex.
I know. MHRA have got to be very, very careful, because I did some work with EMA when they were based in Docklands, and because forgive me, this is a tangent and probably not helpful to you, to very quickly explain, because I was doing my job for such a long time. When I started, MHRA were in charge of the licensing of product in the UK, and then they came together with Europe and it became the EMA. Now, this gave us a problem in cancer for a very simple reason. MHRA prioritised survival, overall survival, in the studies, the outcome studies. EMA prioritised progression-free survival. So we had a shed load of trials that had been in workup and design, and you know that you get your 1, 2, 3, and then or it takes a bloody long time to get a product to license. But when they started and designed the trials and designed the whole way that it was going to go, they thought that they were going to be going for overall survival. But by the time they got there, overall survival wasn't important anymore. It was progression-free survival that was important. And so it's a subtle difference, but it makes a massive difference in the way that it allows you to get a product into a person. And I can see that MHRA, in its decision the last couple of days to allow unlicensed indication or change their approval to facilitate, if they've done that once, that might be forgivable. But if they carry on doing that, then they're going to lose all credibility, and not just credibility with the clinical community, but international credibility. And that will have a devastating impact when it comes to investment in the UK marketplace, and the ability to get novel treatment into NHS use. So it's going to be really dangerous.
I do think that they were looking at the UK as a market where the MHRA could be a very quick regulator that turns things around. They did it with Pfizer vaccine, they did it with AZ, but there is problems with that in terms of there's a reason that this stuff takes time, because you look at thalidomide, you look at polio vaccines. I had a patient when I was teaching in Lincoln that had a withered arm. And that's because we gave him, the medical profession in the 50s or whatever, when he was a kid, 40s, gave him a live vaccine that gave him polio.
So I understand, and I could be wrong, but I understand that the reason that they were able to push the go button so quickly with the BioNTech vaccine was that the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine was because they had been receiving updates through the development.
Rolling review, 100%.
So I don't know what impact that had on the amount of scrutiny that they actually gave, but I'm willing to believe that they gave it due diligence and scrutiny, but that it was fast because they were receiving advance notification.
100%.
So that doesn't bother me so much, but certainly the prospect of going against, there's no way that you can start mixing and matching vaccines. There's no data to support that. There's no rationale for it. That's very concerning, and they will lose a lot of credibility, which will have knock-on impacts for the UK, long term.
Yeah, that's I completely agree. But so I'm just going to go back to a couple of these. What is your awareness on theories as to how COVID-19 came into existence?
I don't know. All I can tell you is that I've heard something about wet markets in Wuhan and about something to do with the Chinese appetite for exotic animals, and hunters going out into the forests in China and in the Far East, and bringing animals out of their natural environment, and bringing them into wet markets where there's cross-contamination with other animals and jumping species. That's the only theory I've heard.
Okay. And what would you deem as a trusted source to get information on that type of thing specifically, in terms of the origins of this? Would you still say Channel 4 is your same answer to that?
No, I would have to. The method that it was communicated to me is different than the source. It would have to be a august, academic, solid source. A professor doing some studies that it might then be reported by Channel 4 News. I don't have to read the original paper myself, but I need them to be reporting it in a balanced way.
But you trust Channel 4 to find the appropriate people and put them up, and then so they're almost acting as a bit of a quality control step for you, would you say?
Yes, because I listen to some other news which doesn't provide a balance. So, for example, there's a programme that I listened to at the weekend on the radio, on Radio 4, which is a political programme. And I can hear that the presenter is biased and interrupts and questions. He's even actually, on one occasion, referenced manifestos and obviously knows, but so when I can see a bias, I don't necessarily trust that they're reporting the story. My belief is that Channel 4 is the most balanced at giving both sides of the story. When I was a student, and I could have this completely wrong, but there used to be something that we were taught about how you construct a paper or an argument, and I think it was called Bloom's taxonomy, which is where you take one research paper and another research paper, and you look at various elements of its appropriateness, where it was published, who the authors are, if there's any bias, things like that. So that gives you a sense of how trustworthy the source is. And then you look at the method and you break it down. And so you look at that conclusion, you take it all together, and then you come to your own conclusion. And I think my belief at the moment, based on what's been happening in the media in the UK over the last year, is that Channel 4 News is the best at doing that.
Okay, thank you. That's very good. Would you say detailed knowledge of the science behind COVID-19 helps, hinders, or has no effect on your day-to-day response?
Does detailed knowledge of the science behind the virus help or hinder? It helps me to feel more confident in interpreting. I believe I understand a little bit of public health. I believe I understand a little bit of immunology. I believe I understand a little bit of virology, a little bit of process, a little bit about drug development. And therefore, when I hear something, it always goes through a kind of sense check or a filter. Is that plausible? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If it does, then I'm more inclined to believe it. If it doesn't, then I'm questioning myself as to, have I got that wrong? Or, and then I want to go and find out more information about it. Does that help or hinder? I mean, it's helpful to feel reassurance that there are sources of information that I can trust. It is helpful to feel confident about supporting friends and family when they're discussing things about the vaccine. For example, last year, I remember feeling great reassurance because, this is going to sound a bit odd, my aunt was a senior nurse. She's 71 years old, but she's still working, and she was working in an elderly mental health institution in Devon. And this was right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was at the time where there was no PPE, or the PPE was very sparse and insufficient. And she posted a photograph of herself on Facebook where she was just wearing ear-looped mask and no face shield. And she was saying about how 4 of her clients had COVID.
Yeah.
And I knew, because of my experience, because Duncan had just been at work and been fitted for his FFP3 and had the fit test and all the rest of it, I knew that that was insufficient. And whilst it alarmed me, it enabled me, that knowledge enabled me to get in touch with her and explain to her why I was unhappy and explain to her what she needed to be safe. So that was quite reassuring. That was quite positive.
That's good. I mean, that's interesting as well, because I can remember seeing pictures of people going around in hazmat suits in China. And then in the UK, they've got a pinny and an apron and some gloves. And the reason that they didn't tell people to wear masks at the beginning is because they were struggling getting supplies for masks for people in hospitals. So there was a bit of a problem there.
And I do fear for the medical profession moving forward, this is just an aside now, is that one of the patients that my aunt was talking about had become unwell, had been sent to the hospital, tested for COVID, tested positive, and then sent back to the nursing home. So he was deliberately admitted to the nursing home with the knowledge that he had COVID. And all the time, people are talking about the rush to send patients home, implying that we didn't know they had COVID, where I actually know they bloody did. And I do worry that this is going to be used as ammunition against the medical profession, that there will inevitably be an inquiry, and they will use the fact that medical professionals knowingly discharge COVID patients into care homes as a rationale or an excuse. And it really bothers me.
No, yeah, me too. Me too. So I completely agree with that. Okay. Has your understanding of COVID increased, decreased, or stayed the same over the past 9 to 12 months?
I think everybody's knowledge and understanding of it is increased. I mean, it's an evolving situation, isn't it? Even like last night, I've been so impressed with some of the excellent communication from a few individuals about risk in particular, and the R number, and there's stuff that's become in the common lexicon that wasn't before. So things like R number, stuff that people didn't really understand necessarily before, but we've learnt well. There was an item last night on the radio that I was listening to where there was a chap, a statistician, I forget his name, I think he was from Imperial, and he was explaining that they've done the most recent iteration of the variant and the infectivity of the variant, and it's come out now at 1.4 to 1.7, I think. But I didn't appreciate until he explained that means a tripling of cases. I didn't understand the implications of it. So there are some really great communicators out there who are doing a really good job. And they're not the media, they're the healthcare professionals and the academics. I've been really impressed.
Okay, so that's very interesting. When you said excellent communication around risk and common lexicon and R number and all that sort of stuff, so that's brilliant. And nobody's talked about that before, so that's good. Thank you. The next bit is subsequent pandemic behaviours as the big broad group. So 3-word slogans have been a big part of the UK government communications. Are there any that particularly resonate with you and why? And if not, and if you've got a better answer for a New Zealand slogan, then let me know. Maybe they didn't use slogans, maybe they actually educated people.
No, they didn't use slogans. And the problem for me with 3-word slogan is the fact that it's a pattern that existed from for the last 4 or 5 years from the Tory party. It's very political. So take back control, hand, space, space. It's all very much of muchness. It's almost like, it's quite formulaic. It's like, we know how to brainwash you. And I'm allergic to that. It's offensive to me. Talk to me like an adult. I'm not a sun reader. And maybe that's intellectual arrogance. It's not meant to be, but please respect the fact that I can understand words of more than 3 syllables. And if you want my compliance, you have to persuade me, and you have to persuade me by talking to me as an adult. I'm not 12.
Yeah.
And no, that's one of the things about New Zealand. They didn't talk down to people. They talked to people like, we are a team. And I know this is hard. And I know you're going to feel lonely or sad or miss something. But we really need everybody to work together. It was a very genuine, and it had integrity. And I don't find that any of the 3-word slogans have any of those positive attributes. I find them, and also because they've been manipulated politically. So I can't remember what the first one was, protect the NHS and save lives or something. And then they decided that they were going to go off in a different direction. And so they changed the slogan, and it's just like, what happened? Why did you change?
I was quite concerned about how they used them as sort of 3-word, like get Brexit done, take back control. There's another one that slipped out, which was we've got Brexit done. Now let's keep Brexit done.
Yeah.
So they're already laying the groundwork, and I do. This is way beyond the remit of this, but I do think that people largely get the political leaders they deserve, and if people really are happy with that, then I'm also quite happy not going out being some kind of political campaigner to try and educate people, because you can lead a horse to water, but unfortunately the masses have got to a point now where they're glued to these devices. Incidentally, these have been made so that they're highly addictive. And one of the things that I'd like to explore is how these have shaped the pandemic, not just in terms of the data and the Bluetooth and the contact tracing and the potential to use them in that way, but also when the World Health Organization are coming out saying that we're dealing not just with a pandemic, but also an infodemic. Yes. This is because the business models behind these companies, like Facebook, Twitter, whatever, are geared up towards polarizing people into two tribes. Exactly. And then getting them fighting amongst each other, because that drives clickbait and drives sales, and the headlines don't really help in that regard. But when you have
the illustration for that, the perfect illustration for that is, how can it be that wearing a face mask is a signal for political allegiance? Why is it that Republicans won't wear face masks and Democrats do? And it's almost like, if you wear a face mask, this is from my family in America now, wear a face mask walking down the street, it doesn't say anything about your regard for your fellow man. It doesn't say anything about your, whether or not you've got a cold. It says whether or not you supported Donald Trump. How did that happen? It's evidence of, as you say, tribalism and the divisions. And COVID has fallen, unfortunately, into that.
Okay. And then the vastly varying way COVID-19 affects people has meant terms like shielding and asymptomatic transmission have sort of come into the vernacular. What do these terms mean to you? So shielding and asymptomatic transmission.
I'm trying to think, because they don't mean anything in New Zealand, because we've never done that. But
okay, that's fine. No, that's fine then. That's fine.
No, I was just going to say, the thing about shielding is that I'm just thinking about it from my mum's point of view, because my mum is in her 70s but in poor health, and her husband is in his 80s. And when I talk to them about the concept of shielding in the right from the beginning, it didn't work, Krish. They didn't understand.
But also, is there not something about, nobody's had the discussion with the elderly generation in terms of, do you want to go out, or do you not want to go out? If you go out, this is the risk. If you don't want to go out, it's up to you. Yes. I can remember chatting to my grandma, where she goes, I don't really care about hugging, because I've always thought it's a bit of a disgusting habit anyway, because when she grew up in Africa, they would never hug each other. That's a kind of English Western world thing.
Yeah.
So the thing that I think is quite worrying is how I very much doubt there was a sort of psychological impact assessment done on locking down the country. And then, because look, if it either wasn't done or it was done and they didn't follow it through, because domestic violence rates went up, alcohol sales went up, the discrepancy between the surveys when people are asked how much they drink and what the actual supermarket sales are almost double different, twofold out of sync, right? So people are either lying or they're buying it and pouring it down the sink.
Or they don't recognise that they're drinking that much.
Or that, yes. But so that is to me quite interesting. So has the asymptomatic transmission been brought up in New Zealand at all?
So in New Zealand, we don't have any COVID. And yes, people are aware of asymptomatic transmission, and I'll tell you for why. I say we, I have very little to do with it. New Zealand has eradicated
That
COVID
speaks
twice.
to the Jacinda Ardern element, though, in terms of she's communicating with the populace, saying that you're all in it together.
Yeah, we're all in it, but what I'm saying is it's not my decision. I just do as I'm told. And as part, I own my part of that. But no, New Zealand has eradicated COVID twice. The first wave that everybody had to deal with, and we eliminated it for about 110 days, and then it came back. They have never figured out how it came back. They think that it might have been because the first person that got it was a worker in a frozen food distribution centre, and there was plausibility that it had come from Australia on some packaging of a frozen food, and they did an immediate lockdown of the area of South Auckland where it happened, and they did a really comprehensive track and trace, and there's a lot of talk about asymptomatic transmission, and we've got the COVID Trace app, and everybody, they changed the law so that all businesses have to demonstrate a QR code. We all get our phones out and click, 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 as you go into the supermarket. So that took a further 3 weeks, and we haven't had any community transmission now for about 30 days. So they've done it twice. But they always they do talk about asymptomatic transmission, and they do talk about, sort of pop-up. They have pop-up testing centres in supermarket car parks, and they really put it on the local news and the local social media. Get yourself down to the supermarket and get yourself tested. So they're not restricting testing to just symptomatic people. They are doing little pop-ups around the country to see if they can detect any asymptomatic spread.
That's very interesting. It's not for talking about now so much, but I'm sending you a paper about asymptomatic transmission because I think it's quite interesting. It's a BMJ editorial about the asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19 that's just come out. So I thought I'd send you that as we're talking. Are you more likely to listen to a friend, expert, or celebrity when it comes to adopting behavioural modifications related to keeping you and your loved ones safe?
Only an expert.
Okay. When stories arose about people breaking the rules, do you think that helped, hindered, or had no effect on the public health response?
Probably hindered.
Okay.
Probably only, and this is not based on any personal knowledge or even family or immediate sort of I saw evidence, but just from a psychological point of view, Barnard Castle, if they're doing it, why can't I? So that's why I say hindered.
Okay, thank you, that's very good. The final question, and then I've got some faces and phrases of the pandemic round. Which is, are there any phrases or words that spring to mind about 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic as a whole?
Are there any phrases?
Or words, or like any final thoughts, really, that you have about this?
I mean, there are lots, but I mean, Jacinda Ardern's been exceptionally good at dropping little vignettes into the news, and I know I've talked about the team of 5 million and bubble, but I don't think I'll ever hear again in the future anybody use the word bubble without being reminded. But the other thing she's very good at is she constantly reminds people to be kind.
Yeah.
So kind is a word that I would associate with it.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
I've observed greater kindness, but just that there's been a kind of zeitgeist or a fairly frequently repeated reminder for kindness or request for kindness.
Okay, fantastic. And then the final one is, I'm going to put up some pictures of people, and can you tell me who they are and what their job is? Jonathan Van Tam. Okay, very good, yeah. I don't know if you can see that. It's a bit of a funny...
I can't remember. She looks like the leader from the MHRA.
Hold on. Can you see that now? There you go.
No, sorry. No,
Okay.
she looks like from the MHRA, but could be wrong.
So
Lady, there was not the chief nurse, the somebody else from the beginning months ago. No, sorry.
this one is the MHRA lady. It's a terrible way of doing it. I'll improve this when I do it for the actual.
Now, Krish.
Sorry.
I think she's got longer hair now.
Yeah, she has. It's an old picture. How about, do you know this one? If you watch Channel 4, you'll probably know who she is.
Oh, Shreda from Edinburgh, American lady who's an epidemiologist advising Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, Shreda, very good. Who's this?
WHO, I can never pronounce his name, but the chief guy from WHO.
Yeah, very good. How about this lady?
Looks like Lisa Nandy from here.
No, it does. I should give you the point. It's not, but it's Maria van Kerkhove.
Right, I don't recognise her, but I do recognise the background, so I'd say she's from the WHO.
Okay, and then finally for the people is...
Oh yeah, Dominic Cummings in the garden.
Very good. And then, and then, so the final one is, can you remember the words on this? Did you ever see any of this branding and this slogan? It might not if you were in New Zealand. But...
digital squares, Chris.
Oh, I pixelated it deliberately.
Oh, okay.
So I pixelated it because I want to know if people remember what the words were on the yellow and red warning when they locked us down in March. Okay, so that was stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
If it had been on a lectern, I might have got that.
Oh yeah, nice. And then the final one was stay alert, control the virus, save lives. Yes. And the interview that I did with my friend after this, or before this one, was he just goes that he saw so many of the fake ones and the joke ones on Twitter that it just completely obliterated the actual messaging. So that just means that I'm able to talk about the funny memes in my MD, and I will put figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 because that's a popular culture element of this. I think it's really important. So yes, that was, I think we're back on for about 45 minutes. I think we spoke a little bit before. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop recording.